Everyone thought Avery Bennett was terrified of the wrong man. The Mafia king watched her with cold indifference while the real danger wore a charming smile. Fear had a way of recognizing monsters long before the mind accepted the truth. It whispered through accelerated heartbeats and restless nights. It tightened lungs inside crowded rooms and taught survivors to study exits before enjoying celebrations. And tonight, the emotionally scarred woman who had spent years hiding behind carefully controlled smiles would unknowingly walk into the orbit of the most dangerous protector in Chicago. At 28 years old, Avery Bennett had mastered the art of becoming invisible. Working as a senior event coordinator at the prestigious Hawthorne Grand Hotel demanded perfection. Every gala, political fundraiser, charity auction, and private celebration depended on flawless execution. Chicago's elite praised her efficiency. Wealthy clients admired her professionalism. Her colleagues envied her composure beneath impossible pressure. No one noticed how tightly she gripped clipboards during stressful moments. No one recognized the subtle hesitation before answering unfamiliar phone calls. No one saw the emotionally scarred woman hiding beneath polished professionalism. Years earlier, trust had become something dangerous. Avery had loved someone who understood exactly how to manipulate kindness. A relationship that began with affection slowly transformed into control disguised as devotion. Every decision became subject to approval. Every dream required negotiation. Her confidence eroded beneath criticism so subtle that even she struggled to recognize it. By the time she escaped, fear had rewired her instincts. Now she controlled everything she could. Her schedule, her emotions, her expectations. Controlled women survived longer. Winter wrapped Chicago in silver frost as Avery moved gracefully through Hawthorne Grand's magnificent ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over marble floors while servers carried champagne through crowds of politicians, celebrities and business magnates. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala represented one of the city's most exclusive events. It also belonged to Damian Blackwood, the king of Chicago's hidden empire. Even among powerful guests, Damian commanded attention without asking for it. At 36, he possessed the composed confidence of a man who understood exactly how much influence he carried. Dark tailored suits fit his broad frame with effortless precision. His expression remained unreadable. His voice rarely rose above calm conversation. People respected him. People feared him. People whispered stories about the ruthless businessman whose legitimate empire masked dangerous syndicate connections. Avery avoided him whenever possible. Unfortunately, Damian seemed equally eager to avoid her. Whenever professional obligations forced interaction, his responses remained clipped and distant. His dark eyes assessed situations with unnerving intensity before shifting away entirely. He corrected details without praise, issued instructions without warmth. Cold, controlled, indifferent. Staff members noticed. The rumors began quietly. The Mafia king couldn't stand Avery Bennett. Heart pounding beneath composed expressions, Avery accepted the explanation because it hurt less than curiosity. Maybe she reminded him of mistakes. Maybe he simply disliked her. She told herself his opinion didn't matter. Yet awareness followed her throughout the evening. She noticed his security team adjusting positions whenever she crossed the ballroom. She caught him observing crowded entrances before returning attention toward influential guests. Twice, she found his gaze fixed in her direction. Both times he looked away first. Fear whispered familiar warnings. Danger rarely announced itself openly. Across the ballroom, another guest smiled too often. Nathan Cole had become a regular presence at Hawthorne Grand events over recent months. Wealthy, charming, approachable. He remembered details Avery never recalled sharing. Complimented her professionalism. Appeared unexpectedly in hallways. Most people considered him harmless. Something inside Avery disagreed. Trauma sharpened instincts. The sensation of being watched tightened around her chest as the evening progressed. Breath became increasingly difficult to steady. Familiar survival habits resurfaced. Count exits. Observe strangers. Avoid isolated spaces. She wasn't imagining things. Someone's attention lingered too long. Near midnight, while delivering updated schedules toward a restricted corridor, Avery slowed outside Damian Blackwood's private office. The partially open door allowed fragments of conversation to escape. His deep voice carried unmistakable authority. There was no anger, no irritation, only absolute certainty. Keep an eye on her at all times. Avery froze, heart pounding violently against her ribs. Then Damian spoke her name. And suddenly, the man she believed hated her became infinitely more terrifying. The feared king of Chicago's underworld had destroyed empires without hesitation. Yet the woman he supposedly despised occupied more of his thoughts than syndicate wars ever had. Damian Blackwood wasn't avoiding Avery Bennett because he hated her. He was avoiding the dangerous need to protect what was never meant to become his weakness. From the top floor of Hawthorne Grand Hotel, Chicago stretched beneath a blanket of falling snow, its glittering skyline hiding the shadows that powerful men called home. Damian stood inside his private office, one hand resting against the floor-to-ceiling window while the city pulsed beneath him like an empire breathing through steel and glass. He had built his life around control. Control over emotions. Control over business. Control over loyalty. Control over fear. The Blackwood Empire thrived because Damian never allowed personal attachments to interfere with strategy. Politicians negotiated with him. Billionaires sought his approval. Syndicates respected the invisible boundaries he enforced with quiet precision. Even betrayal had rules within his world. Emotions had none. That was why Avery Bennett unsettled him. She wasn't supposed to matter. The first time he noticed her had been almost a year earlier. A high-profile charity auction had collapsed into chaos after one influential donor publicly humiliated a junior employee over a scheduling mistake. Most people turned away, unwilling to risk offending wealth and power. Avery hadn't. Without hesitation, she stepped between authority and vulnerability. Calm. Professional. Protective. She redirected blame without embarrassing anyone further, preserving dignity while absorbing criticism herself. She shielded others instinctively, even when no one shielded her. Since then, Damian had observed her from a distance. The way she apologized before speaking during stressful meetings. The way she startled whenever unfamiliar voices appeared too close behind her. The way she smiled politely despite exhaustion shadowing her hazel eyes. Emotionally scarred people recognized one another. And Avery Bennett moved through life like someone who expected danger around every corner. His surveillance team hadn't understood why he requested background reports. The findings disturbed him. An emotionally abusive former relationship. Months of therapy records indicating chronic anxiety. Financial sacrifices made to help struggling family members. An apartment selected specifically because it offered multiple exit routes. No criminal connections. No hidden agenda. Only survival. Fear had taught Avery how to disappear. Damian understood fear differently. Fear taught kings what they couldn't afford to lose. Inside the surveillance room hidden beneath Hawthorne Grand, glowing monitors illuminated his expressionless face. Security footage cycled endlessly through elegant hallways, service elevators, parking structures, and ballroom entrances. One screen always lingered longer than the others. Avery coordinating events. Avery laughing quietly with kitchen staff. Avery rubbing tired eyes after 16-hour shifts. Avery checking behind herself before entering empty corridors. She didn't know she was being protected. And Damian intended to keep it that way. Distance was safer. He convinced himself the surveillance existed because Hawthorne Grand represented valuable territory. Because maintaining order required vigilance. Because threats emerged unexpectedly. None of those explanations felt entirely honest. Outside his office, whispers about his apparent dislike for Avery continued spreading among hotel employees. He allowed it. Coldness created boundaries. Boundaries protected people. Especially people capable of becoming weaknesses. Weeks earlier, one of his security specialists had mentioned a guest frequently appearing near Avery's schedules. Nathan Cole. Investment consultant. Charitable donor. Respected social figure. At first glance, Nathan appeared harmless. Too harmless. His attendance patterns mirrored Avery's work assignments with unsettling consistency. Conversations lasted slightly too long. Familiarity emerged where none should exist. Heart pounding beneath practiced control, Damian authorized discreet investigation. He told himself it was precaution. Nothing more. But tonight, after Avery overheard his instructions regarding her safety, something shifted. Fresh reports arrived moments later. The atmosphere inside the surveillance room changed instantly. Screens displayed financial transactions moving through shell corporations. Luxury properties linked to offshore accounts. Photographs capturing Nathan Cole alongside individuals known within Chicago's hidden underworld. Damian's expression hardened. Nathan wasn't acting alone. Fear whispered through the empire. Power answered. Because the charming man who smiled at Avery during ballroom galas wasn't merely obsessed. He was connected to rival syndicates. And suddenly, protecting Avery Bennett no longer threatened Damian Blackwood's carefully controlled heart. It threatened an entire kingdom. By the time Avery Bennett realized she was being hunted, it was already too late. Fear followed her through empty parking garages, crowded train stations and sleepless nights. She thought she was escaping one nightmare, never realizing powerful syndicates had already placed her at the center of a war she didn't understand. Chicago had always been a city of movement. People hurried through snow-covered sidewalks without meeting each other's eyes. Trains rattled beneath the streets carrying strangers toward separate lives. Luxury sedans drifted past homeless shelters while businessmen negotiated million-dollar deals over expensive dinners. The city thrived because everyone learned to mind their own business. Lately, Avery couldn't. Fear had returned quietly. It began with familiar faces. A man reading newspapers at different train stations. A woman standing near hotel entrances more often than coincidence allowed. Luxury vehicles parked outside Hawthorne Grand for hours without purpose. Tiny details. Whispers. Most people would never notice. Traumatized people always did. Heart pounding, Avery tightened her grip around her coffee as she crossed downtown Chicago before sunrise. The icy wind bit against her cheeks while crowds surged around her. She checked reflections in storefront windows without appearing obvious. Still there. The same silver sedan. The same dark-haired stranger pretending not to watch. Breath lodged painfully inside her chest. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe old fears had resurfaced. Survivors questioned themselves first. Fear made reality unreliable. At Hawthorne Grand, she buried herself beneath endless responsibilities. Floral arrangements needed approval. Guest lists required confirmation. Last-minute schedule changes consumed entire afternoons. Control had become her coping mechanism. If she stayed busy enough, perhaps anxiety would lose interest. It never did. Meanwhile, several floors above the elegant ballroom, Damian Blackwood stood inside the surveillance room hidden within his empire. Dozens of screens illuminated his face in shifting blue light. Security footage. Financial reports. Private investigations. Nothing escaped his notice. Nathan Cole's profile expanded with each passing hour. Investment consultant. Public philanthropist. Secret connections buried beneath shell companies and offshore accounts. The deeper Damian's investigators dug, the darker the truth became. Nathan's financial transactions intersected repeatedly with rival syndicates operating beyond Blackwood territory. Organizations known for infiltration rather than chaos. Strategists. Patient hunters. This wasn't obsession. It was orchestration. One investigator placed another file before Damian. Avery Bennett, the report began. His expression sharpened. Months earlier, Hawthorne Grand hosted a discreet fundraising event attended by influential donors, politicians, and business executives. Avery had coordinated logistics personally. Routine work. Nothing extraordinary. Until investigators discovered irregularities hidden inside archived schedules. Several guests later connected to financial crimes had altered attendance records after the event. Money laundering. Fraudulent charities. Political payoffs. Avery unknowingly documented everything. Every adjustment. Every request. Every signature. Because she excelled at her job. She possessed records capable of exposing powerful people. The hunted woman had accidentally become evidence. Back downstairs, Avery's day unraveled further. An anonymous bouquet arrived at reception. No signature. A handwritten card containing only 3 words. I see you. Ice spread through her veins. Hours later, someone entered the employee lounge moments after she'd left. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed. Except a framed photograph repositioned toward the doorway. Close. Too close. She stopped sleeping. Night after night, she lay awake listening for unfamiliar sounds beyond apartment walls. Every creak became danger. Every passing car tightened fear around her ribs. Emotionally controlled people understood one brutal truth. You could escape places. You couldn't always escape fear. Until fear transformed into instinct. One snowy evening, Avery exited Hawthorne Grand through a side entrance and froze. The silver sedan waited across the street. Engine running. Windows darkened. Heart pounding violently, she turned away. Another figure emerged from the opposite sidewalk. Then another. Not approaching. Watching. The city suddenly felt smaller. Breathless, Avery returned inside the hotel through employee corridors, fighting panic threatening to consume her. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. She was not a victim. She became powerful the day she survived. Somewhere above her, Damian Blackwood reached a decision. Kings protected kingdoms. Protectors shielded what mattered. Fear whispered consequences. Power answered. He looked toward his security team. Prepare one of the secure properties. The room fell silent. Loyalty moved without hesitation. Because before rival syndicates reached Avery Bennett first, the King of Chicago intended to hide her inside his empire. Avery had spent years learning that safe places didn't exist. Every promise carried conditions. Every act of kindness demanded something in return. So when the most feared Mafia boss offered protection with no chains attached, she didn't feel relieved. She felt terrified. The drive through Chicago unfolded beneath a blanket of falling snow and city lights blurred against rain-streaked windows. Avery sat silently in the back seat of Damian Blackwood's armored SUV, clutching the strap of her handbag as if it anchored her to reality. Fear pressed against her ribs with every passing mile. People like Damian didn't protect women like her. Kings didn't build shelters. Empires didn't offer kindness without collecting debts. Yet Damian sat across from her without speaking, his attention fixed beyond the tinted glass as if guarding against dangers only he could see. The penthouse waiting above the city looked nothing like the prison Avery expected. Italian marble stretched beneath soft lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Chicago's glittering skyline. A private library lined one corridor, its shelves filled with worn novels and leather-bound classics. Warm fireplaces replaced cold intimidation. Female staff greeted her with professionalism rather than curiosity. A trauma specialist introduced herself before quietly explaining emergency protocols. A wellness coordinator offered tea instead of questions. No one demanded explanations. No one invaded her space. Her breath caught unexpectedly. The word frightened her more than danger ever had. Damian established boundaries with calm precision. No confinement. No forced intimacy. No obligation. Protection only. His dark eyes met hers briefly before shifting away. You choose where you go inside this home, he explained. You decide who enters your space. The concept felt foreign. Avery had spent years negotiating survival through compliance. Now freedom existed inside the empire of the man she feared most. Heart-pounding, she waited for hidden conditions. None arrived. Days passed beneath quiet routines. Morning sunlight poured across marble counters while fresh coffee appeared beside breakfast without expectation. Female staff checked on her emotional well-being rather than reporting her movements. Panic rooms designed with comfortable furnishings existed as options rather than threats. Still, trust remained elusive. Emotionally controlled women survived through caution. Every kindness triggered suspicion. Every gesture invited questions. Why was Damian doing this? Why protect her? Why her? The king himself remained distant. He appeared during evenings dressed in tailored suits, discussing business with measured restraint before retreating into private offices overlooking the city. Yet Avery noticed small details. Her favorite tea appearing without request. Security adjusted discreetly whenever she ventured onto rooftop gardens. Medical appointments scheduled around her comfort. Protection woven into ordinary moments. Not ownership. Shielding. One snowy afternoon, curiosity carried her toward the penthouse library. She wandered between towering bookshelves until an unfamiliar folder caught her attention near a side desk. Security reports. Hotel surveillance logs. Transportation records. Weeks turned into months of documentation. Avery's movements. Her schedules. Parking garage footage. Anonymous threats intercepted before reaching her. Her trembling hands moved through page after page. Damian Blackwood had been protecting her long before she knew fear had returned. Long before silver sedans appeared outside train stations. Long before she overheard whispered instructions. He had asked for nothing. No gratitude. No loyalty. No claim. Only her safety. Breathless, Avery stared through the library windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Perhaps monsters weren't always recognizable. Perhaps protectors wore cold expressions because caring too openly carried risks of its own. For the first time, fear loosened its grip just enough for another emotion to emerge. Trust. And that terrified her most of all. Because if Damian Blackwood had quietly become her safe place, what happened when safety itself started feeling dangerously close? People said Damian Blackwood feared nothing. They were wrong. The moment Avery Bennett's life slipped beyond his protection, the king who negotiated wars with calm precision became something far more dangerous. Because the woman he thought he hated had quietly become the one person he couldn't afford to lose. Snow drifted across Chicago beneath a sky bruised with approaching storms as the Blackwood Empire awakened before dawn. Hidden command centers flickered to life beneath luxury hotels and corporate offices. Surveillance screens illuminated anxious faces. Trusted advisors moved quickly through marble corridors, carrying encrypted reports that no longer sounded like routine updates. Avery Bennett was missing. 4 years, Damien had mastered the discipline required to rule an empire. Fear never reached his expression. Betrayal became another problem to solve. Syndicate wars unfolded across boardrooms rather than battlefields, and he navigated them all with calculated restraint. He never panicked, until now. Standing inside the surveillance room, Damien studied the final footage showing Avery leaving a Foundation planning meeting. The recording ended abruptly moments later. Silence settled across the room. The king's breathing remained controlled. His voice never rose. Yet everyone surrounding him recognized the shift immediately. Power had become personal. Find her. 2 simple words transformed an empire. Luxury sedans moved through Chicago's sleeping streets while private investigators reopened dormant networks. Every loyal contact owed to Blackwood influence received instructions. Political allies abandoned breakfast meetings. Hotel security teams reviewed archived footage. The city itself seemed to hold its breath beneath falling snow. Because Damien Blackwood had stopped acting like a strategist. He had become a protector. Across the city, Avery sat alone inside a secluded lakeside estate hidden beyond Chicago's skyline. The elegant retreat appeared peaceful at first glance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked frozen waters. Fireplaces glowed softly against expensive furnishings. Classical music drifted through empty hallways. But emotionally scarred women understood something others often missed. Beautiful places could still hold fear. Heart-pounding, Avery walked slowly through unfamiliar rooms. Nobody had harmed her. Nobody shouted. Nobody explained. The uncertainty itself became its own prison. Fear whispered old lies into her thoughts. You attract danger. You burden people. You survive alone. Closing her eyes, she pressed trembling fingers against her chest and focused on breathing. Again. Years ago, fear controlled her choices. Fear taught her to shrink. Fear convinced her she needed permission to exist. Not anymore. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Opening her eyes, Avery studied the reflection staring back from the darkened window. She had survived heartbreak. Escaped emotional captivity. Faced hunters without surrendering herself. And somewhere within the chaos consuming Chicago, a dangerous king was searching for her. The realization unsettled her. She trusted him. The man she believed incapable of kindness had become synonymous with safety. Meanwhile, inside Blackwood headquarters, another devastating truth emerged. The betrayal had originated from within trusted circles. Someone close had traded information to rival syndicates. Loyalty fractured. Whispers became war. Damien absorbed every report without visible reaction, but his dark eyes betrayed something infinitely more dangerous than anger. Fear. Not fear for himself. Fear of arriving too late. He remembered Avery offering coffee to exhausted hotel staff after 12-hour shifts. The quiet determination hidden beneath her politeness. The way she protected others despite carrying invisible wounds of her own. The queen buried beneath survival instincts. Without realizing it, Avery Bennett had reshaped the empire's king. He moved toward the lakeside estate beneath gathering storms. Snow swirled violently against black vehicles cutting through isolated roads. Advisors urged caution. Negotiation remained possible. Damien ignored them. Some things outweighed diplomacy. Some people became worth risking kingdoms. By the time he stepped inside the secluded retreat, Avery was already moving toward him. Their eyes met across elegant hallways illuminated by firelight. Relief struck first. Then something infinitely more terrifying. Meet. For one suspended heartbeat, neither moved. The protector had found what mattered most. Avery's breath trembled. Damien's control fractured. He crossed the distance separating them and positioned himself instinctively between her and every possible threat. Jill. Power. Mine. The words echoed silently through the spaces fear once occupied. Outside, storm clouds swallowed Chicago whole. Inside the retreat, the king who once ruled without attachment finally accepted the truth he had spent months denying. Avery Bennett wasn't merely someone under his protection. She had become the one person capable of bringing an empire to its knees. And before dawn painted the frozen lake in silver light, Damien Blackwood risked everything, including his own life, to shield her from the danger closing in around them. Loving powerful men had nearly destroyed Avery once before. Standing beside Damien now, she faced an impossible question. Was she truly safe with a man capable of both mercy and destruction? Or had she simply traded one form of control for another? The journey back to Chicago unfolded beneath steel-gray skies and melting snowfall, yet Avery Bennett couldn't quiet the war unfolding inside her own mind. The lakeside retreat had changed everything. Not because Damien Blackwood had found her. Not because an empire had moved at his command. But because she had witnessed something infinitely more terrifying. The king had been afraid. For her. Fear transformed ordinary men into protectors. Fear transformed kings into monsters. And Avery no longer knew which version of Damien stood beside her. The Blackwood penthouse welcomed them back with its familiar elegance. Italian marble reflected soft morning light. The library remained untouched, filled with stories promising simpler endings. Fresh coffee waited in the kitchen. Female staff moved quietly through hallways with reassuring professionalism. Safe. The word echoed through Avery's thoughts like both comfort and warning. She had once believed danger announced itself through raised voices and shattered promises. Ethan had taught her differently. Control often arrived dressed as devotion. Protection could become possession. Love could disguise cages so beautiful that women forgot how to leave them. Heart pounding, Avery stood before the penthouse windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Had she escaped one prison only to enter another? Damien noticed the distance growing between them. He always noticed. Even when Avery smiled politely. Even when she insisted she was fine. Even when silence became easier than honesty. Days passed beneath quiet rituals and sleepless nights. Morning coffee appeared exactly the way she preferred. Security teams adjusted discreetly around her schedule. Doors remained unlocked. Choices remained hers. Yet fear whispered relentlessly. What happens when powerful men decide they can't lose you? One evening, rain tapped softly against floor-to-ceiling glass as Damien found Avery alone in the library. Neither spoke immediately. The silence between them carried too much truth. "You don't trust me," Damien finally observed. It wasn't accusation. Only recognition. Avery wrapped trembling fingers around her untouched tea. "I trusted someone before," she admitted softly. "He made me believe control was love." The confession lingered heavily in the quiet room. Damien's gaze lowered briefly before returning to her face. "The difference," he said carefully, "is that I know exactly what I am." The king rarely offered pieces of himself. Tonight he did. "I can protect people." Rain intensified beyond the windows. "I can build empires." His expression remained controlled. "And I can destroy what threatens them." The honesty stole Avery's breath. No excuses. No manipulation. Only truth. "I've spent my entire life learning how to survive power," she whispered. "So have I." Their eyes held. Two emotionally scarred people standing dangerously close to understanding each other. Fear still existed. Danger still lived beneath Damien's composed exterior. He wasn't gentle. He wasn't innocent. He ruled through certainty few people could comprehend. Yet he had never demanded loyalty. Never claimed ownership. Never asked Avery to surrender herself. That contradiction terrified her. Because monsters weren't supposed to offer freedom. Kings weren't supposed to respect boundaries. Protectors weren't supposed to fear becoming the very thing they hated. Something shifted between them that night. The emotional distance remained. But the silence softened. For the first time since entering Damien's world, Avery stopped wondering whether he could hurt her. Instead, another question emerged. Could she survive caring about someone capable of carrying both darkness and devotion within the same heart? Unable to sleep later that evening, Avery wandered through the penthouse while rain painted silver trails across Chicago's skyline. The library doors stood partially open. A private study beyond them remained empty. Curiosity pulled her forward. Mahogany shelves lined the walls. Confidential files rested inside meticulously organized cabinets. Everything reflected Damien Blackwood's need for control. Everything except the folder left partially exposed upon his desk. Her name caught her attention instantly. Avery Bennett. Breath-catching, she opened it. Security reports. Threat assessments. Transportation schedules. Hotel surveillance logs. Emergency protocols. Page after page documented risks she never knew existed. Weeks became months. Months became over a year. Long before anonymous messages. Long before silver sedans. Long before fear returned. Damien Blackwood had been quietly protecting her. Without permission. Without expectation. Without asking for anything in return. Then Avery reached the final page. Heart pounding violently beneath her ribs, she stared at the authorization signature beneath personal protection orders. 1 year. 3 months. 17 days. The monster she misunderstood had been guarding her long before she knew she needed saving. And suddenly, Avery Bennett realized the most dangerous truth of all. Damian Blackwood had never hated her. He had simply feared how much she mattered. Fear had dictated Avery Bennett's choices for most of her life. Fear taught her to hide. Fear taught her to run. Fear convinced her that survival meant leaving before people had the chance to leave her first. But loyalty chosen freely possessed the power to transform survivors into queens. And this time, when the empire around her began to crumble, Avery refused to abandon the man who had become her shield. Chicago woke beneath a sky painted in shades of silver and storm gray. Inside Blackwood headquarters, quiet urgency replaced the polished elegance that normally defined Damian Blackwood's empire. Advisors moved through hallways carrying confidential reports. Security teams adjusted protocols. Trusted allies exchanged tense glances over encrypted messages. Betrayal had finally found its way inside the kingdom. The rival syndicates hadn't simply targeted Avery. They had infiltrated the empire itself. Fear whispered through marble corridors. Loyalty answered. Standing inside Damian's private study, Avery stared down at the protection files documenting more than a year of silent devotion. Every intercepted threat. Every schedule adjustment. Every unseen danger Damian had shielded her from without seeking gratitude. He had protected her long before she understood why. Long before she mattered to herself again. Heart pounding, Avery closed the file carefully. The old version of herself would have left. Fear would have demanded distance. Trauma would have mistaken love for danger. But emotionally scarred women eventually learned one undeniable truth. Healing required choice. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Elsewhere inside the empire, Damian stood before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. For the first time in years, exhaustion touched the king's expression. The rival syndicates had grown bold. Trusted names surfaced inside betrayal reports. Business partners became suspects. Loyalty fractured beneath the pressure of war. The kingdom he spent years building no longer felt invincible. Yet none of it frightened him as much as one possibility. Avery leaving. He had spent his entire life mastering emotional control. Control protected kings. Control prevented weakness. Then Avery Bennett arrived with quiet kindness and trembling courage, teaching him that protecting someone meant risking heartbreak. He never intended to need her. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Damian turned. Avery stood at the entrance to his study. No fear shadowed her eyes. No hesitation. Only certainty. For a suspended moment, neither spoke. The city breathed beyond towering windows while silence carried everything words couldn't explain. Finally, Avery crossed the room. Close. Deliberate. Choosing. I know about the files, she said quietly. Damian's expression remained unreadable. You should. No denial. No excuses. He looked toward the skyline instead. I would understand if you left. The confession landed heavily between them. Avery searched his face. The feared king. The dangerous protector. The emotionally controlled man who carried empires upon his shoulders yet secretly remembered how she took her coffee. You spent over a year protecting someone who didn't even know your name mattered, she whispered. You owed me nothing. I know. His answer came without hesitation. Because loyalty demanded honesty. And that's why I did it. Something inside Avery shifted completely. For years, fear had defined devotion through sacrifice and control. People loved her when she made herself smaller. People stayed when she stopped asking for more. Damian had never asked her to surrender herself. He had simply stood beside her with an open hand. Protect. She'll. Safe. Choice. The empire surrounding them felt distant. Because the greatest war had always existed inside Avery's heart. The war between fear and trust. The war between running and remaining. The war between surviving and living. Tears gathered quietly in her eyes. Not from sadness. From understanding. Queens weren't women untouched by fear. Queens were women who chose courage despite it. Heart pounding, Avery reached for Damian's hand. For the first time, the king allowed someone to witness the vulnerability beneath his armor. His fingers tightened around hers. Only briefly. As though reminding himself she still belonged to herself. Outside, emergency sirens echoed faintly through Chicago's streets while the empire prepared for whatever came next. Inside the study, peace settled between two emotionally scarred souls. Protector. Survivor. King. Queen. Then Damien slowly released her hand. His voice remained steady despite the emotion hidden beneath it. You don't owe me loyalty. His gaze held hers. You don't owe me gratitude. He stepped back. If you want your freedom, Avery? The king lowered every shield around his heart. You can leave. Silence filled the room. Because after everything they had survived together, Damien Blackwood offered the one thing fear had always tried to steal from her. Trust. And suddenly, Avery Bennett realized that the safest place she had ever known wasn't built from marble, security teams, or powerful empires. It was the man willing to let her walk away, even if it shattered him. The greatest act of love wasn't possession. It wasn't power. It wasn't fear. It was choice. After everything they had survived, Avery Bennett stood beneath the soft golden lights of Blackwood Estate and finally understood something that had taken her years of pain to recognize. Damien Blackwood had never tried to control her. He had never demanded loyalty through fear. The king who could command syndicates with a whisper had never once asked her to belong to him. Instead, he had built a safe place around her and waited patiently to see whether the emotionally scarred woman who spent her life hiding from danger would choose to stay. Spring had returned to Chicago. The brutal winter that once mirrored Avery's fear had faded into warmer evenings filled with quiet peace. Blackwood Estate no longer felt like a fortress surrounded by danger. It felt like home. The haunted memories that had controlled her thoughts for years no longer whispered with the same power. Fear had once been her closest companion. Hiding had become survival. Escaping had become instinct. Trust had become impossible. But somewhere between hunted nights and whispered promises, the dangerous king she thought hated her had slowly become the safest place she had ever known. Damien remained the same man the city feared. Rivals still avoided speaking his name carelessly. Powerful men still lowered their voices around him. His empire continued expanding quietly across Chicago while enemies remained far beyond the walls he had built around those he loved. But something inside the king had changed. The cold distance that once made him seem unreachable had disappeared. There was still danger inside him. There was still power. There was still control. But Avery had discovered something nobody else understood. His strength had never been about domination. His greatest power had always been protection. Months earlier, Avery would have run from such devotion. Trauma had taught her that love demanded surrender and pain. She had believed safe places were fantasies meant for other people. But Damien never rushed her healing. He never asked her to become someone else. He never forced promises from a heart still learning how to breathe again. Instead, he remained close enough to shield her fears without imprisoning her freedom. And because of that, she chose him. Not because he was powerful. Not because he owned an empire. Not because he could destroy anyone who threatened her. But because he had shown her what loyalty looked like when it came without chains. People across Chicago viewed Damien Blackwood as a king. Avery saw something entirely different. She saw the lonely man who carried burdens nobody understood. The man whose silence hid fear. The man who spent sleepless nights protecting everyone except himself. The man who had quietly fallen in love with a broken woman and patiently waited for her heart to heal. And for the first time in her life, Avery stopped hiding. She stopped expecting betrayal. She stopped preparing for abandonment. She stopped surviving. She started living. Together. Blackwood Estate slowly transformed into something no empire could buy. Family dinners replaced emergency meetings. Laughter echoed through halls once filled with secrets. Peace settled over the mansion that had witnessed war, loyalty, betrayal, and fear. The woman who once walked through life emotionally controlled by trauma had become something stronger. Not because Damien changed her. Because he gave her enough safety to become herself again. Chicago whispered stories about the king and queen who ruled from the shadows. Some feared them. Others admired them. But only a handful understood the truth. Their empire wasn't built by power. It was built by trust. And trust was stronger than fear. Late one evening, rain softly touched the windows of their private terrace while city lights glittered below like distant stars. Avery rested peacefully beside Damien, her heart completely calm. For the first time since escaping her past, silence no longer frightened her. Because silence beside him felt safe. And Damien Blackwood, the dangerous protector who commanded empires and inspired fear inside enemies, sat beside her with quiet contentment. Not as a king demanding obedience, but as a man grateful that she had chosen him. He understood something few monsters ever learned. Love could never be taken. It could only be given. And Avery had given him something more valuable than loyalty. She had given him peace. But destiny had always loved testing happiness. As rain continued falling over Chicago, Damien's secure phone vibrated softly against the table. His expression changed. Only slightly. But Avery noticed. The warmth inside his eyes disappeared beneath the familiar calm that once terrified rivals and syndicates alike. Far away, hidden inside the shadows of a forgotten chapter neither of them had expected to reopen, someone stared at an old photograph. And smiled. Avery Bennett once believed Damien Blackwood hated her. She never realized the distance he kept wasn't cruelty. It was fear. Because monsters who choose love don't stop being dangerous. They simply decide whose heart becomes their safest place. And who they will protect until their final breath.